This is the update because DWR kind of changed the rules on us afterwards, and then gave us money to fix it.
So board passed this today, then this would become the new plan.
Right. Then we would make the changes I talked about in the PowerPoint to clean up some of the errors and the language, and then we would make.
Okay. Any more questions from the public? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for questions. Aaron?
Yeah, and David kind of asked it, I was just curious on how many more monitoring wells you wanted in or needed. You know,
Well,
I mean, they talk about the construction, you know, that they need to know how the wells were constructed, but yet you look at that one map there that you have up there, it shows the little dots and how many wells that they have the construction information on, and it's virtually all of them, especially in the Big Valley, except for like one. You know, and it's just, and then in this year, the proposed one, I noticed I was thumbing through here, you didn't have anything in Big Valley.
Right. Well, no, Big Valley's in there with the monitoring wells. So we don't have an alternative monitoring plan for Big Valley because it's being monitored by wells. And I could go to, oh, this is a good map. So in this map, this is our data gap analysis figure. The basins that are green, we deemed had adequate monitoring. We weren't going to look for new wells there. The areas in yellow are ones that we were going to meet the CalGEM requirement via alternative monitoring planning, which is the satellite photos and the permits. And then the ones in orange are the ones where we were looking to add additional wells. Now, we're not required to add additional wells in Big Valley, but we thought we would be proactive in looking to add more monitoring since it's been designated medium priority for Sigma, that and Sigma would likely require more monitoring in the future. Just my professional opinion from I know, that we would try to get more wells up there just as an additional benefit.
I see what you're saying with the alternative. Okay, I got that. You know, and interesting, I want to point out, you know, if you look at this map, it doesn't matter if they're orange or green. Those are all the basins that we have in Lassen County that we're expected to monitor and tell people what they can and can't do. But then you look at all that white around there, which is BLM, Forest Service, we have zero control over that. But yet that's where all of our drainage goes. It goes to those basins. It goes to Eagle Lake. It goes to Big Valley. It goes to Honey Lake Valley, down to the lake to fill up if we ever get it. And that's where our groundwater recharge comes from. And we have zero say on what goes on in that whiteout. So, and, you know, but yet they're expecting us to manage everything within those little lines in the orange and the green. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with fish and game, you know, with the conservation easements, you know, and the wells, they can do whatever they want. We have no say over that. The only ones we have any say over is the people sitting right here in this room, the private individuals. And we're expected to tax ourselves and to limit ourselves and to limit each other. And it's just, you know, it's just terrible that we have to do this to ourselves. I mean, we're just cutting our own throat. They want this information so they can take it back to Sacramento to say the fish in the Delta are more important than the fish in Eagle Lake because there's more work to come from down there. You know, the cow, you know, the hay in San Diego is more important than the hay up here because, you know, it's worth more in the woods.
Right, but I'm not going to disagree with you.
And so we got to find a way to incorporate all that white ground and how we monitor all that white ground as well, is what I'm saying. You know, whether it's...
Right, and I agree with you, but I think maybe, unless I'm seeing it wrong, the groundwater monitoring we're doing now with this particular project is nothing more than information to give a static reading out of the groundwater. It doesn't matter what BLM or Forest Service does.
Right, but then you go like to Big Valley, where there's...
Big Valley is a different deal.
I know, but and it's coming to right down there to that farm green in the Honey Lake Valley too.
Well, it could if they change their criteria to set up the changes between high, medium, and low priority.
We've got to get something set up where we have control over more than just those little boundaries.
I think we're talking two different.
But I'd be happy to do that project in the future.
Long term. You know, we need to keep that in the back of our minds as we move forward.
Right. The watersheds contribute to the recharge of the groundwater basins. So what's on the map are groundwater basins. Groundwater basins are delineated by the department as areas that have been filled with sediments that are transported by water. So Madeline Plains is an old lake bed. There's sediments in there that have been transported by rivers, creeks, and lakes, things that settle out. Same in Big Valley, same in Honey Lake, same in all of them. And the areas in between that are white are mountainous. They're in Lassen County. They're almost all volcanic rocks.
Would I be correct to say that a large majority of the groundwater basins are private land?
I have not looked at that, but I would say
Most of
probably.
it is the valleys with the farming and the grading.
Right.
You get in your BLM and up in your mountains, there's no groundwater basins.
There's less incentive to own land in the mountains because you can't do as much with it. It's hard to secure a water supply up there because the fractured bedrock doesn't hold as much. And so, but the rain that does fall there does contribute. So you could look at the watersheds and then calculate how much rainfall is there and where that water might be going for water budget type calculation.
Okay, Jim, I think you have a question.
Yeah, that was that question I was going to expand a little bit. I think Mr. Alba raises a very significant point and one that we ought to be given some thought to. And I think that the groundwater in white areas have influence and significant impact upon the orange and the green areas. I mean, they're not like isolated towers that don't. I mean, I think there's a lot of cross relationship. I mean, the Eagle.
But they're not, it's not groundwater.
Well,
Skedaddle is not a groundwater basin. Schaefer Mountain is not a groundwater basin.
It's not a basin, but the Schaefer Mountain provides water that fills
that eventually works its way down to it. And when the Eagle Lake Interagency Board was formed, it was formed on the premise that about a third of the property within the Eagle Lake Basin was under county control. So no matter what we did land use wise, it would affect the holdings of the other 2/3, which 1/3 was BLM and basically 1/3 was Forest Service, and the state lands kind of control the lake itself. And so what they do on their holdings and how they manage it is going to have an impact eventually on us. And that's, I think the concept of that kind of that cooperative interagency thing is fundamental, and I think that pertains even in this case. Now, we have to be appreciative of the fact that the Forest Service is pretty much all but declared they're not going to manage their resources. They don't want the public on the public land, and they're going to do everything to preclude it. So whatever could happen on their holdings probably won't have any effect other than the fact it'll burn up, and then that will cause other kind of pollutions and stuff to maybe run off from those burn areas that could affect our groundwater basins. But I think that's tying all that together. I think we should make sure that we lose sight of that. I think Mr. Albaugh raises a very significant thing. Now, obviously, we've got to focus on oranges and the green areas, but where those areas get a lot of their water comes from that white.
For the watershed, correct. The Thurman watershed affects every groundwater basin, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the study that they
No,
have.
we're not studying watershed here, we're studying the groundwater basin.
But we have to understand that the groundwater basins come from within the watershed. So I think there needs to be that causal linkage retained in there. I mean, not that we're going to go out
The
and
linkage
study.
is when you measure, in my wells, for instance, the static level in March, and you check it again in October after the pumping off of it, or you pump it after the winter. What you get there, whether it's 10 feet or 20 feet or 15 feet, the change would be created by the runoff from the surrounding watershed. And that's when the watershed is measured by them things. So it is already.
Well, I think it's significant when we know what's happening in, let's say, I'm just going to use the Honey Lake Basin to start with. So in that green area, in March and October, we know what the influences are and what's happening by the use at this level. But it'd be nice to know what is within the watershed that feeds into the Honey Lake Basin, what is happening with their static water level. Now, if their static water level is maintaining a very high level there, we know that there's the potential for the recharge to come into our basin. But if all of a sudden they've got problems up there, they're not going to be able to help us downstream, and then we've got even a bigger problem.
I think, Jim, what you need a geologist right there. I don't think you're going to have static water levels on the top of Skedaddle.
Right.
Well, I mean, it's not to say there aren't sediments outside of those basins that you can draw water out of. That's for darn sure. I think the department has defined those water basins with their best knowledge as to, areas outside of those boundaries. Or, if you pump outside that boundary, in theory it should not affect inside the boundary. but we all know
Spend a
that.
moment talking about fracture flow.
Yeah,
'Cause that's what we're
yeah, because up in those mountain areas, you're not talking about alluvial sediments. You're talking about you've got to know your fractures, and you got to drill your wells into those fractures and kind of preferential pathways where the water comes in. It's a dicey business. It's a much more dicey business drilling a hard rock well than a sediment well.
Do you know what page that is in this big volume here? I'm trying to find it.
This map, the data gap analysis that we did is not in the monitoring plan. We used it,
Well, I haven't been able to find it.
that's why you can't find it. We used it to guide what wells we selected that go into the monitoring plan. It's a nomenclature thing. We purposely didn't put it in the plan. It's one of our project deliverables because DWR uses the word data gap as a failure. And our data gaps are areas for improvement, not failure. And so we didn't want to confuse them while they reviewed our plan. And so
We're mixing up two things here. And again, I believe what we're being told and what I understand is these watershed runoff is what creates these static levels that they are measuring. By measuring this, it tells you what's happening up there.
Well, the concern I have is right here. You've got Hogg, you've got McCoy, you've got all kinds of, and they're not necessarily under private ownership, but they're upstream, feed into the Susan River.
That's surface water.
But
That's watershed runoff.
That's actually,
Surface water, but also goes to groundwater.
yeah,
Exactly,
yeah.
and that's what they're measuring.
I know, but they're not measuring it up there because it's in the white area, and I think that's the point that Aaron's trying to make.
They don't have to measure it.
I know they don't have to. I know.
Right. So
You guys are confused.
I actually have a partial answer.
I think Mr. Powell needs a lunch break.
The surface water is measured on river gauges. I don't know how many, I'm not a surface water guy, so I don't know how many gauges there are up here outside of what we put in the 2007 plan. But, so the watershed contributes water to the river, and then it gets measured through these gauges, and then that water flows across the groundwater basin where it might recharge the basin. How much water in the river is obviously connected to how much recharge you get. We didn't look at that because this plan is all about strictly just monitoring the levels in the basin, and that would be a more
The end
comprehensive
product
study.
of all this, coming together, we measure the status of the world.
John, the other county, Shasta, Modoc, Sierra, Plymouth, what's their role in this?
Well, in terms of, so for our CASGEN project, Sierra is a co-monitoring agency down in Long Valley. There's a couple of wells, Long Valley extends into Sierra County. And there's a couple of wells in Long Valley that, in the case DWR stops monitoring, Sierra County will pick up and monitor and share that information with Lassen County. The Honey Lake RCD, same sort of deal. They monitor some of the wells. They monitor some of the wells in Honey Lake right now and report that to DWR. They would then report it to you. Modoc, we talk about monitoring in Big Valley, the north and south part, because obviously Big Valley is an important place, and we haven't had those kind of conversations with Shasta County.
And you're going to add Shasta County to the cooperative agency?
We certainly can.
I think we need to.
Okay.
So in here you say something about groundwater projects. Define that for me.
Groundwater project, funding for a groundwater project.
Yeah.
So by being CASGEN compliant, we're able to apply when the state rolls out money through Prop 1 or whatever program, local groundwater assistance, the old AB 303 fund that this work was funded under. If we get to identify what project we would like to fund, so sometimes it was implementing portions of the groundwater plan, the BMO project was funded by the state. This CASGEN compliance project, which is essentially a bureaucratic effort that the state required us to do and funded us to do. So those sorts of things. Otherwise, it's fairly wide open. It would be the county would have to want to do a project. We would have to talk about what that project is, what the benefits were, drawbacks, etc. And in order to go after a grant, we need board approval, resolution of intent. So any project that we would try to get funding for would come before you.
Okay. So we have 8 basins, and one of them is a high priority.
Medium,
Medium.
yellow. Yeah,
Yellow.
medium and high get lumped together. They
So,
get to do signals.
These monitoring efforts, is that going to jeopardize are priority levels at the state level?
The answer is no, because they already
That's
have
the million-dollar
monitoring.
question.
Yeah, and the answer is no, because the monitoring already exists for them to do that anyway. And they've been doing the monitoring since the 60s.
I've been with Lassen since '74, and they were doing it when I bought that place in '70.
Okay. I didn't
It's
know
all,
that.
DWR's been doing it for a long time.
Reagan started it way back when he was doing it.
Okay, any more questions? None from the public, none from the board. What's the pleasure of the board? Do you feel comfortable to pass this updated version, or are you, everybody totally confused?
This guy knows what he's talking about, and I believe what he has to say.
And he's right, and I agree with him too, and the geologist, you know, he must have learned from me when he said it.
The only caveat is I think that after we dial in the stuff that's in the oranges and the greens and so forth, is I think that we really do need to look at what's happening in those white areas and how they.
It's significant.
Yeah.
We spend our money and our time on significant issues, not insignificant issues. It's not an insignificant issue.
The good news you now will be long gone by the time.
Okay. The time we debated this issue, you know, I'm right and Jim's wrong, like always.
What you learn after you know it all, Bob. And unlike Mr. Hodgman, you haven't learned anything.
So what is the pleasure of the board? What do you guys want to do? Chair would entertain a motion. I think it's the agenda. What's the agenda asking for? Consider adoption of update.
And we'd like you to adopt the updated plan so we can tell DWR that you totally agree with it, and then we can get it finalized.
So this is the one you want to adopt?
Right.
With the changes that you...
With the changes I talked about.
I would move that, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, God. It's good.
You don't know everything.
Also, second that. We got a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Questions from the public? And clerk with the poll of order.
Supervisor Chapman.
You made the motion,
What I was going to say is I have to vote opposite of Bob Heil, so I'm voting yes if you can vote no.
Supervisor Arnold.
No.
Supervisor Hempel.
Aye.
Supervisor Hammond.
Aye.
Supervisor Fire.
All right. Thank you guys for all your intelligence. This has no effect on you guys. As far as
Thank you.
Thank you, John. David, thank you. By the way, his name is David Merrill, on the proposed groundwater monitoring plan.
Yeah, I will. We need to talk. I know. I'll give you that. I got you first. I don't know anything about it. Okay, I
But
will.
all that is. What do we got left here? Let's look here too again. We only got 2 items. H 3 and 4 is all we got.
And I want,
Or I is just.
and, information from the board from Mr. Egan, if you count that on that.
I don't count that as an item. Let's take up H3, personnel rules and regulations.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we were here some months ago to discuss proposed changes to personnel rules and regulations. During the course of that discussion, there was public comment received from the sheriff about making certain that we comported with the policy committee policy, if you will. And since that time, I took his remarks to heart. We had not employed the use of the policy committee for many years, but it has been reconstituted, and meetings have been agendized and held, and they've considered various items, including this particular policy that you find before you as H3 in resolution form, and they have approved it and recommended for your approval as well. What it proposes is the following. Amendments to, deletions of some of the articles of the personnel rules and regulations related to the different definitions of part-time and or temporary, seasonal, or on-call employees. They had over time been created on a kind of ad hoc basis, and they popped up over the years. So then what occurred was we had, almost a patchwork quilt, if you will, and they were found in places other than Article 2.35, which generally speaking relates to employment status. Yet they sought to define employment status, and so it was, and what precipitated this was the Affordable Care Act and the need to make certain that the manner in which we employ part-time people comports with the Affordable Care Act, so that we are not subject to the kind of draconian sanctions that the Affordable Care Act provides for employers, public or private, over a certain number that don't abide by its rules. And so that is, in large part, what this seeks to do, is to bring all of those provisions together into one, to define the eligible possible employment statuses for the part-time, temporary type employees in the manner that's proposed. And also, keying off on what Supervisor Chapman had asked at that last hearing, he wanted something to be expressed related to retired annuitants. And there has not been an article in the personnel rules and regulations related to retired annuitants previously. I drafted one, and it's included in this resolution, and I gave it a number, and I'm offering that to you.
Well, that's to try to make us consistent with the PERS requirements and what the restrictions are,
Yes.
and how retired annuitants can even be used, because we basically have had an unlimited open door for that, but that's changed because of the retirement rule changes.
That's a result not of the Affordable Care Act, but of
No.
PEPRA, the
PEPRA,
Public Employees
yeah.
Pension Reform Act. Went into effect January 1 of 2014 or thereabouts. But essentially, CalPERS has over the last couple of years been adding staff, and typically the department that they are adding staff in is the audits department. And the number of audits of county and state agencies is up. And one of the big areas they're looking at is compliance with CalPERS rules related to employment of retired annuitants. And if you understand the context of retired annuitants, you'll know that these are persons who retired out of CalPERS agencies and are drawing a pension from CalPERS as a result of their work therein, and yet they go to work up to 960 hours per, I think it's calendar year or fiscal year.
Calendar year.
And
12-month period.
and yet they're not making contributions back into CalPERS. They're not reinstating into the program. And CalPERS, despite the desirability of that for the retired annuitant, CalPERS is feeling the pinch because there were an increasing number of these kinds of employees that were working past retirement, really in the same job that they had worked in or something similar, and yet they weren't making the contribution to CalPERS, and so CalPERS was feeling denied contributions.
Well, just the other day there was an article on that digital clipping service that about I think he worked for CAL FIRE, and he retired out 3% at 50, so he was relatively young when he took his pension, and he had maximized his, he was getting like $300,000 or something as a retiree. That's his pension. And then he went up, he moved from either the Bay Area or Southern California or somewhere, and he wound up getting a job, got on the fire board of one of the little fire districts there around the Sacramento area, and before a short period of time, went from the board to being like the fire chief for those folks, and was drawing a fairly hefty $125,000 salary or something from them as a retired annuitant. And so CalPERS, because of the PEPRA losses, they can't do that. I mean, that was happening a lot all over the state. maybe not so much here, but it was happening, and we had people who retire out of one department and maybe go to work in another department, you know, and collecting their retirement check. And if you're going to do it, if you're going to go back to work, fine. You just have to freeze your retirement draw and just take. So they made that guy.
You get reinstated.
Yeah, you have to be reinstated, and so they basically, that's how they treated him, and they made the guy, he's in the process of paying back about $450,000 worth of retirement benefits that he drew while he was working this other so-called part-time job.
So CalPERS has the authority if a retired annuitant is working for us, CalPERS, and that retired annuitant is essentially breaking the rules dealing with retired annuitants, CalPERS has the right to go in and forcibly reinstate that employee into the PERS system, to sanction them, and to sanction the employer. And certainly that's not something, position that I want to find us in.
We haven't had anything that really clearly defines that, and that's why I think it's important that we have that put in there, because the rules have all changed, it's a whole new ballgame, and there's, you know, so we need to have at least a clear definition of how and when we allow a retired annuitant to fill in a temporary fashion, and we have to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in jeopardy with CalPERS that way.
And that's the reason for 2.66.1 as proposed. So the previous amendment to 2.35 deals with the Affordable Care Act and the limitations that have been imposed on us as a result of that. And the new Article 2.66.1 is to deal with Supervisor Chapman's request and also the need for addressing retired annuitants that are working within the county event.
Okay, anybody from the public and staff or anybody have any questions or answers?
Not questions or answers.
Discussion. You have a question or an answer?
I shouldn't be amazed, but I'm still amazed at the way you do things. The new Article 2.66.1 allows a retired employee in Lassen County to basically double dip. They get their annuitant monthly or however they get it, and then you're allowing them to work with this language, you're allowing them to work a calendar year. I noticed in the language Mr. Burns drew up, he has used the word fiscal year, which technically a retired person can be hired from June 1st to June 30th, and then the change of the fiscal year starts on July 1st, and then could work the remainder of the year. I'm wondering if, I'm not sure what your intent is here with this, because I certainly don't accept Mr. Burns' explanation or Mr. Chapman's explanation of it. Is it your intent to use fiscal year, knowing that they can work from January to December, or are you more interested in working the 960 hours? Because the way it's written, the language written now, you could work the entire year, the entire calendar year. So do you want to use fiscal 960 in a fiscal year, or do you want to use 960 hours in a calendar year?
Well,
Because
I
there is a
think
difference.
CalPERS, I think, if I'm wrong, Robert, you could, you're sitting up, I think under that PEPRA law, the 960 hours is in a 12-month period of time. Whether you start the clock running on January 1 or you start it on July 1, which is a fiscal year. Our budgets operate on a fiscal year basis, so that would be, I would think, would make sense to use a fiscal year. But if they, if come July 1 and they're in the new fiscal year, the clock doesn't start all over. That 960 hours is only within a 12-month period of time. So if you start the clock, started working on February 1st, then your 960 hours has got to be up by August 1st.
So your intention is to limit that particular employee, that
It's not,
person
it's
is
not our intent. I
960.
think the law requires that you can only work 960
Well, then
hours.
maybe the language needs to be corrected to 12 months instead of fiscal or calendar. Maybe, because you could be hired in February or March, and
My understanding from reading the, when all the stuff came out with TEPRA and when CalPERS following, you go up to Society, it's, there's a website, it's calsomething.com, but it does deal with all the CalPERS discussions